In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, we find out all about the brand new CYBiobank and a Centre of Excellence at the University of Cyprus.
Biobanks are very well-organized collections of high-quality biological material, let's say DNA, which is associated with medical records. So it's not just a collection of a little bit of DNA or urine or plasma or whatever. You need to have it associated with, as detailed as possible, personal, demographic and medical data of the volunteer.
And it seems the President has made some controversial choices in his mini-cabinet reshuffle.
The Ministry of Education, there are two crucial points. One is the educational policy, and the second, which guides these educational policies, is ideology.
A project was recently launched at the University of Cyprus for the development of a modern biobank and the Cyprus Human Genome Project, otherwise known as CYBiobank. And the Professor of Genetics at the university is the coordinator. He is Konstantinos Delta, and he joins us now. Konstantinos, I'm sure we spoke several years ago about the original biobank and what that did. And this seems to be something that is expanding it in a very big way indeed. Is that right? What's it actually going to do?
Yeah, this is indeed the continuation, let's say, of a project we started 9 years ago from seed funding by the Cyprus Research Promotion Foundation. And then we sought funding from the European Commission, and we had funded through phase one with nearly €500,000 to build up on this biobank, which was actually the first biobank approved to operate as a biobank in Cyprus. And the most recent development was our success in phase two of the program within the Horizon 2020 for upgrading this research infrastructure into a biobank and also generating a center of excellence for biomedical research.
Now, what's held in the biobank, for people who missed our interview several years ago, and do also refresh my memory, because it's very particular and important, I think, because of some of the genetic abnormalities that occur in the Cypriot population.
We are interested in studying in depth the Cypriot genome. We are interested in generating what I call the Cypriot reference genome, just like any other population or ethnic group has generated their own. So it's useful to reach out to genome data which are all available on the cloud, but certainly we would like to have also our own Cypriot reference genome. Let's say in a way it's going to be initially as a first step, the healthy reference genome, so that we can always compare it when we start working massively on genetic disorders. Of course, we've been working on genetic disorders for nearly 30 years now, but a lot more needs to be done. So having access to the so-called healthy reference genome is an exceptionally useful tool, not only for my work, for the work of my group, but for the work for any geneticist in Cyprus who is concerned with genetic disorders.
And let's go into some of the genetic disorders that are prevalent, particularly in Cyprus, because I'm assuming that if you have that healthy baseline, then you can start studying what the difference is in the DNA of people who suffer from these diseases.
Exactly. The key word here is identifying and evaluating correctly the significance of differences between the genome of a diseased person, of a patient, compared to the reference genome. And this is part of our everyday life in molecular diagnostics and precision medicine. we need to be able to identify as accurately and as quickly as possible the significance of every variant, DNA variant we find in a patient. And this is applicable to any genetic disorder, either monogenic, rare, or more frequent. So we are speaking of kidney disorders, neurogenetics, and dementias, diabetes, cardiovascular conditions, you name it. I also name it something like a national treasure, which is going to be available to every researcher. Now, how are we approaching this? Through the biobank. There are biobanks everywhere in the world. We were perhaps one of the last countries to acquire our own biobank, and this was a personal initiative through external competitive funding. But we did. And I say it's the first biobank in the sense that it is not just a collection of samples. It's what I will give you immediately a definition, but it's a biobank. It's the first biobank which was approved officially by the Cyprus National Bioethics Committee to operate as a biobank.
I'm presuming that if you've got this information, it's a pointer that you could identify risk factors much, much earlier on and not wait for symptoms to manifest themselves. So that particularly with children and inherited diseases, I'm thinking how we tackled thalassemia over all those years ago.
Yeah.
If you can identify that at birth or even in utero, then presumably you can take action and do something about it.
This is part of it. So biobanks are exceptionally good and useful medical research infrastructures. Okay, they are infrastructures in the sense that they can assist, they can promote the research around the biobank. So the biobanks are organized collections, very well organized collections of high quality biological material, let's say DNA, which is associated with medical records. So it's not just a collection of a little bit of DNA or urine or plasma or whatever. You need to have it associated with, as detailed as possible, personal, demographic, and medical data of the volunteer. And this is imperative because it's the only way when you start doing your research and you start generating data relating to genetics, biochemistry, physiology, and everything, to be able to associate the clinical data or the molecular data you generate with the phenotype of the volunteer. And the volunteer may be a healthy person, or he may be a patient with a specific disorder. The important thing is to be able to associate the genotype to the phenotype. And this is what biobanks are supposed to do. We were doing this for a number of years, but underfunded. Now with this new success, which is one of the big successes ever in Cyprus, which I dare saying is going to inaugurate the next generation of biomedical research in Cyprus. I don't mean to underestimate or belittle the research that many of us have been doing over the past several decades, but with this kind of funding and with collaboration with advanced partners from Europe and Cyprus, we hope we will be able to do the next generation biomedical research in more depth, but also more broadly.
I was going to say, the money is actually going to enable you, I presume, to get more people to come forward and offer their DNA to go into the bank. Now, what does that entail? Who are you looking for? Is it anybody, or is it particular samples of the population, either men or women or young or old, healthy, unhealthy, or whatever?
In principle, we're interested in everybody. However, even though the money is a lot, and let me give you a number, the project has been approved for funding, and we started already on October 1, with funding from the European Commission of 15 million euro. The government of Cyprus is matching this 15 million with another 15 million, and the University of Cyprus is adding another 8 million. So we started with 38 million euro for a time horizon of 15 years. Of course, the idea is to go even beyond that through various means, which means that this project is going to go beyond my own biology. So we are interested in principle in everybody. However, even though the money is a lot, it's still not enough to do everybody. So we are going in a stepwise manner on specific projects. So it's a project-oriented operation. Initially, the very first project we are starting, we call it Mythos 1, because we are going to have also Mythos 2 and perhaps even Mythos 3. Mythos 1 is going to be focused on about 1,000 healthy volunteers, men and women, Cypriots, in the entire geographic region of Cyprus. And when I say Cypriots, I mean people who are either Greek Cypriots or otherwise living in Cyprus for a long time, permanent residents.
Turkish Cypriots as well?
Turkish Cypriots, in principle, we are very much interested as well, but because of the political problem that you're aware, it may not be easy to include them from the beginning. If not from the beginning, we certainly hope that tackling the political division and the problem we have with the Turkish occupation, we will be able to have access to Turkish Cypriot samples.
I'm thinking simply because I remember lots of cases where there have been bone marrow donations from either a Turkish Cypriot to a Greek Cypriot or vice versa. So the DNA is very similar, and it seems that if you can't include at least some of that population, and of course then there are Maronites, Armenians and other people who are coming, it's such a mix in Cyprus from all the history that we've got, that it must be very difficult to know that you have got a really broad base sample.
It's very well written in the proposal we have, that we want and we need to include representative numbers from every one of the minority populations in Cyprus. When I say minorities, I do not exclude people who are, for example, British minorities. We know that there are British people living in Cyprus for decades, and they are permanent residents.
Or many who've married Cypriots and their children are half and half. So that, it's interesting because I spoke very recently on the programme to someone from the Karaiskakion Foundation, and I noticed that they're next door to you in the building here. How will your database, or can it, help them? Because they're busy taking DNA samples to try and find bone marrow matches. Are you able to share any of this data? I know that you've obviously got to get the permission of the volunteers, but if you do, could they look at your biobank from the Karaiskakion and say this might be somebody we should contact?
Yeah. This part of the Karaiskakion work is different. First of all, it is not research-oriented. It's specifically for bone marrow transplantation via matching of the potential donors and the recipient. So we would like to think that the data we will generate will be of much broader usage.
Yeah, sure, but what I'm trying to get at is who will be able to access that data?
Everybody will be able to access it.
Because it's not just, I mean, from your point of view, it's for research, but from a clinical point of view, it could be very valuable indeed, again, particularly with relation to some of these genetic illnesses that we have on the island.
Yeah. The data and the results we will generate will have clinical applications in the short and in the longer run. And as I said before, the data are going to be accessible to every researcher who is interested in doing something useful. So people who would like to have access to the data or even biological material to do their own works, they will have to apply and get the samples. There may be some permission to be given, or there may be some nominal cost, certainly much less than it would cost them if they would do it on their own. And this is actually the idea of having access to a biobank. The way I describe it is that if you're a researcher or a medical doctor and you would like to do research, if you have access to a worthwhile biobank material, it's as though you're running a marathon And instead of waiting on the start line like everybody else, you're 10 kilometers ahead of everybody else. Because of this national treasure you have access to. So this is the idea. We want to facilitate the research by everybody. So to answer more directly your question, yes, the data and the results will be accessible by everybody under perhaps some provisions, but they will be available. And not only to Cypriot researchers, but everybody out there. In fact, we have been approached by a private pharmaceutical company which is interested in investing in our operation and taking advantage of the good material we have for studying DNA. Obviously, we would provide them data anonymously, and they will invest amounts in the orders of more than €1 million for assisting us in this operation for a common good. So, because it's going to be of mutual interest and mutual benefit, but most importantly, it's going to be to the benefit of the Cypriot citizen.
And that is Professor of Genetics at the University of Cyprus, Konstantinos Delta, telling us about the development of the modern biobank and the Cyprus Human Genome Project, CYBiobank, which has just received funding from the European Commission and the government, and the university itself also pitching in. It'll take about 15 years for that funding to be spent, and a lot of things are expected from it.
Listen online to the Cyprus News Digest on YouTube or at cyprusmail.libsyn.com. The latest program is uploaded every Friday, and if you missed one, you can catch up there.
President Anastasiades reshuffled his cabinet this week, and there were perhaps some surprising choices, not to mention the timing of the reshuffle. So I've invited political analyst Christoforos Christoforou to join me to discuss the changes. Christoforos, let's talk first about the timing of this, because I think a lot of people were surprised that with, for example, the proposed reforms to local government just happening or about to happen, that it's a strange time, for example, to move the Interior Minister. Is it all down to the fact that the Finance Minister did say he would go before the end of the year, or is there more to it?
Yeah, the timing, yes, it's a little bit strange, but at the same time it was a kind of a forced reshuffle. Georgiadis, the Minister of Finance, had already announced his departure. At the same time, we have the deputy who was appointed as commissioner to the European Commission. So there are 2 posts vacant, and there was also a conviction that the Ministry of Finance was going to be taken by the Minister of Interior. So it was an expected move. Of course, what you have mentioned about the reform of the local authorities, the local government, and which after 5 years is still at the stage of proposals, it's a strange thing that cannot explain these changes.
So let's talk about who has been appointed to what. I mean, let's start with transport. Vasiliki Anastasiades hasn't really been there that long, has she? She's not had a chance, really, to make her mark. Why move her?
Yeah, okay. This is a question that 2 of the ministers, the Minister of Education also, have been there for less than 2 years. So, and these are 2 very big ministries. I mean, education and communications, transport, and all these affairs are huge. And in order to have results, you need time. And we saw, for example, that Anastasiades has left at the time of approving the new public transport changes with new carriers, operators, etc. So we don't have any any answers in any way. With regard to the Minister of Education, yes, there also there are some contradictions or inconsistencies, because he has been in the middle of conflicts with education.
But he's also tried to introduce the new exam system and so on and so forth, which has put him really sort of up against the teachers' unions and the students to some degree. So what do you make of the new appointment? What's he going to do?
Yeah, but to finish with this, we can say that the departing minister is one that had to implement the decisions of the government. These were not his own decisions. Of course, the handling of issues by him was not the most proper one, and the conflictual way he handled this forced the cabinet to appoint groups or interministerial committees to handle things, etc. And strangely enough also, he was appointed to somewhere else. So we don't have explanations. We can't have justification for the changes.
Now, can I just go back? When the president was elected, I seem to recall him saying that he would have a government of all parties.
Yeah.
Now, if we look at these new appointments, which parties do they belong to?
Okay. I am not offering justification, but this has been the narrative of most of the presidents, to have an all-party or universally accepted persons, etc. But this has not been the case. And
well, they've usually had one or two from another party because they have to get all their legislation through Parliament, don't they? And that's been a sort of bargaining chip, the appointment of cabinet ministers.
Yes, this has been the case, but in any way we see that parties in the parliament, they take positions not because they have their members or officials in the cabinet, but because they feel that this can save some votes or serve the general interest of the party. And the fact that we are in a presidential system means that whatever happens in the parliament does not affect the government, and no one wants to have the blame for any failure of the system to work. The system works.
Does
good
it?
Or bad, but it is in operation, in operational state. So this is the problem.
Okay, now we mentioned at the beginning about the reforms to local government, and the mayor of Ayanaba has also been given a post which conveniently removes him from being mayor when he was adamant that he did not want to join up with the municipality of Paralimni. Talk us through that. Do you think that was something as to why he was chosen? What are his qualifications for his new post?
I'm not very aware of what the qualifications of the Minister of Communications are, but in any case it seems that this appointment is convenient for two. It's convenient for both Carusos, who was opposing the joining Paralimni, but it might be also convenient for Paralimni mayor, who has been very vociferous in connection to, though we don't have any ministers from our area, but there also he has someone who was opposing the joining Paralimni in the reform away.
And what do you think he'll bring to his new job? Do we know anything about him other than the things he's done as mayor? Is he qualified for the job? That's the other thing that's been raised in the local press, is what are the qualifications for putting particular people in particular ministries?
Yeah, I think this is a question that we should have in mind that is not the only one. I mean that from those who are appointed, we see that what is the relationship of the Minister of Education with education in general? Nothing. Never been an educationist, never had any job with Ministry of Education, etc.
Does that surprise you? I mean, you've studied the politics of the island for many years. Is it customary? I mean, you look at Trudeau's government in Canada, and he appointed, I think, pretty well every minister to an appointment in which they had prior experience.
Yeah, it's experience, but it's also the qualification, other kind of qualifications. In the specific case of the Ministry of Education, I leave aside the Ministry of Communications. We don't have yet anything concrete, but there, the Ministry of Education, there are two crucial points. One is the educational policy, and the second, which guides these educational policies, is ideology. And I see
the influence of the church, particularly.
Not only the influence of the church is linked to ideology and the nationalist ideology. So we have there a minister, the minister who departed, who expressed himself in a way that conflicted with the general mindset of people that in that ministry we should not have this nationalist and identification with the lamb, okay? And we place someone to replace him that is even more nationalist, in the sense that he is there for about 40 years with nationalism in respect of the Cyprus problem, convictions which are very hard to reconcile with any solution of reunification.
What does that tell us? How do you interpret this? Because we're talking about the way the next generations of Cypriots think. That's what education is all about, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is a big problem of education in Cyprus, because until the 70s, 80s, education, it was not just nationalist, but extremely nationalist because of the recruitment of teachers. It has always been like that. It's only after the 80s, 90s that people who were not that much nationalists have joined the educational system as teachers. So this is also the problem of progressing. Because if you are so much not just nationalist but also traditionalist, where you are influenced by the church, you are influenced by conservatism, and you don't see forward, this means that there is a stalemate or retrogression. You go back. And we see that the country is not progressing. We saw in the last... this is very crucial to say. We saw that the World Bank, in its evaluation of Cyprus 3 months ago, found that corruption in Cyprus has progressed inverted commas, because corruption
increased.
The progress increased more than in any other country in the past 5 years. And we are talking about fighting corruption. Rule of law has also regressed in Cyprus, and all these things that put a country forward are not progressing, they are going back. So we have a big problem as society, and we don't see in the political elite, but not only, in other institutions in Cyprus, any forces that could push the country forward. And we have to think again, what are our values and what is our vision for the future?
Well, it certainly hasn't been helped, I think many people would agree, by the rather strange choices in the recent cabinet reshuffle. Are we going backwards, or is there a chance that sometime in the not too distant future we could eventually start to move forwards? Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.